Good evening all, and welcome back to Untold Fears. Tonight, we are venturing into the frozen heart of Manitoba, where small towns huddle against endless prairie darkness, and winter silence hides secrets that should never be disturbed. 10 true accounts from communities so remote that when someone vanishes, the snow covers their tracks before help can arrive. These are not urban legends whispered around campfires. These are documented events that left investigators baffled, families shattered, and survivors forever changed. From phantom vehicles that appear on desolate highways to locked rooms concealing decades of horror. From voices rising beneath frozen lakes to creatures that stalk the loneliest stretches of road. Tonight, you will hear what happens when isolation meets the inexplicable. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Untold Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Manitoba's forgotten towns, where help is hours away, cell towers do not reach, and the cold preserves more than just bodies. The first time I realized something was wrong with the bus route out of Dauphin, it was a Tuesday in late November, the kind of prairie night where the darkness feels thick enough to touch. I was 23 then, working the closing shift at a small grocery store on the edge of town. My apartment sat 6 miles out near a cluster of farmhouses and a tiny crossroads that barely counted as a community. The only reason I could keep that place was because of the evening bus that ran the same loop every night, connecting the town to those scattered houses and gravel roads before heading back empty to the depot. Everyone in my area knew that bus. The old blue and white coach with the rattling heater and the driver who always kept the same thermos in the cup holder. He would nod when I stepped on, ask how my day went, then let me ride in silence. Out on those lonely stretches, it was usually just me, him, and the crunch of frost under the tires. In winter, the windows would fog up so much that I would have to wipe a little circle with my sleeve just to see the faint glow of distant farm lights. The night the bus vanished, I did not even think about any of that. My manager locked the front doors at 9:30, and I stayed an extra 15 minutes to face the shelves and take out the trash. The air outside slapped me in the face, sharp and dry, my breath trailing behind me in clouds. The bus stop sat under a single yellow street lamp, surrounded by an empty parking lot and the dark shapes of closed shops. I checked my phone. 9:47. The bus always pulled in at 9:50. I could see my own reflection in the shelter glass, pale and tired, bundled in my thick parka. I was scrolling through messages when I heard the familiar diesel growl. The bus turned the corner right on time, headlights cutting through the night, and eased to a stop with a squeal of brakes. The doors folded open, and I climbed aboard, tapping my pass against the reader. There were only 3 other passengers that night. An older woman from town who worked at the care home, a man in a reflective work jacket that smelled faintly of oil, and a teenage boy with headphones on and his hood up. I'd seen all of them before at one time or another. We all did the same tired commute, rotating in and out of the route like background characters in each other's lives. The driver gave his usual nod. His name was Ray, according to the little ID card clipped near the steering wheel. He was in his 50s, with a lined face and a calm way of driving that made even the iciest nights feel manageable. I sat in my usual spot, 5 rows back on the right side, where I could see the reflection of the aisle in the window glass. The heater blew lukewarm air at my boots, and the bus pulled away from the curb. We wound through Dauphin's quiet streets, past the dark silhouettes of houses and parked cars lined with frost. Christmas lights had started going up on a few porches, little islands of color in the otherwise empty night. The older woman got off near the care home, giving a small wave to the driver as she stepped into the crunchy snow. The man in the reflective jacket exited near an industrial corner of town where the streetlights became more sparse. That left just me and the boy with the hood up. The town fell away behind us. Streetlights thinned and then disappeared completely, replaced by the black expanse of fields and the vague outline of tree lines against the sky. Out there, the only light came from the bus itself, a moving bubble of brightness surrounded by snow and darkness. The interior rattled softly as we drove, the overhead lights casting long shadows over the empty seats. I remember glancing at the boy. He had not moved since we left town, eyes fixed on whatever was playing in his headphones. I wondered where he got off. Most teenagers I knew lived in town proper. Out here, there were more cows than people. The thought drifted away as the minutes ticked by. The road was familiar. I could almost feel each turn before we took it. A small curve around a line of trees. A long straight section where you could sometimes see the glow of the highway in the distance. A dip where the snow always drifted higher on the shoulder. Then the bus slowed. I looked up expecting to see my stop coming into view, that faint porch light that marked the lane to my place. Instead, the bus eased onto the shoulder, in a spot I did not recognize. There was no intersection, no visible driveway, nothing but a shallow ditch and a wall of black trees beyond the glass. I leaned into the aisle to look ahead. The road was empty, stretching into darkness in both directions. No stalled car, no wandering deer, nothing that would make sense as a reason to stop. I thought maybe the bus had broken down until I saw the driver's posture. He was sitting forward slightly, hands on the wheel, staring fixedly at something straight ahead that I could not see. "Are we okay?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. He did not turn around. For a second, I thought maybe he had not heard me. Then he spoke without moving his head. "Just stay in your seat for a minute," he said, his tone flat. "We will carry on." The boy pulled off one headphone and looked around, confused. The engine idled, humming beneath our feet. Outside, the snowflakes drifted lazily through the beams of the headlights. I wiped a patch of condensation off the window with my glove and peered out. The trees were closer than I had realized, their bare branches like a mass of tangled fingers. Just beyond the reach of the headlights, something looked wrong with the darkness, as if it were thicker in one patch, less willing to be cut by the light. The driver reached for the console where the radio sat, the one he used to check in with dispatch. His hand hovered over it, then withdrew. I saw his shoulders tighten. "Is someone on the road?" I tried again. This time he did turn, just enough for me to see his face in profile. There was sweat on his forehead despite the cold, and his jaw was clenched so tight the muscle jumped. "Do not get off this bus," he said quietly. "No matter what you see, we will be moving in a minute." The boy laughed nervously. "Is this some kind of joke?" Before either of us could say anything else, something hit the side of the bus. It was not a bang exactly, more like a heavy, dragging thud that started near the back and moved slowly toward the front, as if something substantial had brushed along the outside metal. The bus rocked slightly. The boy stood up halfway, gripping the seat in front of him. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. The driver snapped his head forward again, staring through the windshield. Another sound followed, this time higher up, a scraping across the windows moving from back to front. I stared at the glass beside me, but the foggy interior reflection made it hard to see anything clearly. For 1 second, I thought I saw the outline of a hand press against the window from the outside, the fingers too long, too thin, splayed wide. Then it blurred and vanished. The boy swore under his breath and moved into the aisle as if to go closer. The driver slammed his hand onto the rail. "Sit down," he barked, voice sharp in a way I had never heard before. "Now!" Something else hit the bus, directly behind the driver's seat, hard enough that it echoed. The overhead lights flickered once and then stabilized. In that brief dimming, the world felt smaller, like the darkness outside had pushed closer. I sank lower, gripping the edge of my own seat so tightly my fingers ached. For the first time since I had started taking that route, I noticed how alone we were out there. No houses in sight, no other vehicles, no cell towers, just a ribbon of road and the trees leaning over it like a tunnel. The scraping sound began again, slower this time. It moved toward the front, then up as if climbing. I heard it drag along the metal roof above our heads, then stop directly over where I sat. I could feel the faintest vibration through the frame of the bus, as if some weight had settled there. The boy whispered, "What is that?" The driver did not answer. The first time I heard the voices under Lake Winnipeg, I thought it was just another weird radio glitch. When you work summers at a small marina near Gimli, you get used to the VHF chattering all day, with half-finished conversations, overlapping calls, and static from boats bouncing signals off the water. By my third season, I could practically recognize regulars by the way they pressed the talk button, the pauses they took between words. It all became background noise while I swept docks, checked fuel lines, and tied off rental boats. That summer, I was 19 and saving for school. The marina sat on a narrow inlet that opened into the wide gray expanse of the lake. On calm mornings, the water looked almost flat, like someone had stretched a sheet of dull metal to the horizon. On windy days, whitecaps would smash against the breakwater and spray fine mist over the dock boards. The lake was always there, huge and indifferent. Locals respected it in that wary way you reserve for something that has killed people but still feeds your town. The old guys who hung around the bait shop liked to tell stories when business was slow. They talked about sudden squalls that flipped fishing boats, about ice that looked solid until it swallowed snowmobiles, about fog that rolled in so thick you could hear other engines but never see their lights. One story came up more than the others. They called it the drowned ones. Storm nights, one of them said once, tapping ashes into a coffee cup. "If you sit here long enough, you will hear them calling on the radio, the ones who went down and never got pulled back up. They still use their call signs, still think someone is coming." Everyone laughed it off, the way people do when something sounds like a campfire tale. But there was a tension under the laughter, a way the older men avoided making eye contact with each other. Superstition and lake life always seemed tangled together. By late August, the days were getting shorter and the weather more unpredictable. We had a week of clear skies followed by a sudden system that rolled in hard from the north. The forecast called for high winds, heavy rain, and a strong risk of thunderstorms. The marina owner decided to close early and told everyone to get their boats out of the water or at least tie them down more carefully. He locked up the shop and told me I could head home too. The problem was my ride had already left. My parents were visiting family out of town, and the friend who usually drove me had bailed. The owner tossed me the keys to the small staff cabin by the docks and said I could crash there for the night rather than try to bike home through the storm. It sounded like an adventure at the time. The cabin was basic, a single room with 2 bunks, a small table, and a space heater, but it beat getting soaked on the shoulder of the highway. By the time the storm fully hit, it felt like the entire building was wrapped in noise. Wind screamed around the corners, rattling the windows in their frames. Rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded like gravel. The lake roared against the breakwater, the waves thudding and crashing, sending vibrations up through the floor. I turned on the little radio in the cabin, more out of habit than anything else. It was tied into the same VHF system as the main office, and usually buzzed faintly with marina chatter even after hours. At first, it was just static, and the occasional crackle of distant voices. Someone from another marina up the shore checking in. A weather channel repeating advisories every few minutes. The kind of noise I had tuned out 100 times before. I sat on the lower bunk, scrolling my phone, listening with half an ear. Then the weather channel cut out mid-sentence. The voice faded into a wash of static, not like the signal had just disappeared, but like something else had pushed its way through. For a moment, the speakers hissed loudly, filling the small cabin with white noise. I reached to turn the volume down. That was when I heard it. "Mayday, Mayday, this is..." The rest of the sentence dissolved into crackles, then came back in pieces. taking on water. Coordinates. Can anyone hear? The voice was male, panicked, speaking fast. The sound quality was bad, distorted like it was coming from very far away, or through an old damaged microphone. I leaned toward the radio, frowning, and grabbed the unit's handheld mic. We are supposed to monitor for emergency calls, even after hours. "This is Gimli Marina," I said into the mic. "State your position. Say again, over." For a few seconds, there was only more static. Then the same voice burst through, louder this time, as if the signal had surged. "Whitecaps over the bow. Engine failing. She is going down." Behind the words, I could hear something else. The roar of wind, the slap of water against metal, someone coughing violently. It sent a chill up my spine because it sounded so immediate, like the person was standing right outside. I repeated my call, asking for coordinates, trying to follow the training I had been given. The voice ignored me, or could not hear me. "Mayday, this is the North Wind," he shouted. "We are 4 souls on board. Anyone, please." The name punched through the fog of fear in my head. North Wind. I had heard that name before. There was an old plaque on the marina office wall, set among faded photos of fishing teams and trophy catches. It listed boats that had gone down on the lake and the men who had been lost with them. The North Wind was one of them, a commercial fishing boat that had sunk about 14 years earlier in a sudden storm. 2 bodies recovered, 2 never found. The man at the bait shop had pointed it out to me once, tapping the engraved letters with a gnarled finger. "They say they still call," he had muttered, "on nights like this." My mouth went dry. I looked at the clock on the cabin wall. The second hand ticked steadily over a face smeared with foggy condensation. 21 to 17. The storm had been raging for nearly an hour. The radio crackled again, and now another voice overlapped the first, distant and broken. "Lost engine. Waves. God, she is rolling." I switched channels, thinking maybe I was picking up a recording, some kind of replayed training scenario. But every channel I flipped through was the same. A wall of static, and then snatches of desperate calls, all bleeding into each other, all using the same name. "This is the North Wind." Took a wave over. "We are not going to make it." The dates did not make sense. The North Wind had gone down long before I ever worked there. The radio logs in the office recorded its final mayday, short and hopeless. That call belonged to 14 years ago. It could not be happening live. Yet the fear in the voices did not sound like anything recorded. It was raw and immediate, full of the kind of pauses and hitching breaths that you do not usually hear in training material. I told myself it must be some weird interference. Maybe another boat had recycled the name. Maybe the storm was bouncing signals in strange ways from God knows where, making old transmissions bleed into the present. My rational brain tried to stack explanations into something that felt solid. Then the wind shifted. The whole cabin shuddered as a stronger gust howled around it. The sound from the radio changed too. The roaring background noise in the transmission lined up perfectly with what I could hear outside. When the voice on the radio described a lull in the wind, the howling around my walls eased at the same moment. When he shouted about a sudden gust, the cabin's windows rattled in response. It was too exact to be coincidence. I pressed the mic button again. "This is Gimli Marina," I said, my voice shaking. "North Wind, if you can hear me, say your last known coordinates. Over." Silence answered me. 1 second, the radio was full of overlapping maydays, and the next it went dead quiet. No static, no distant voices, just a faint electrical hum from the speaker. It stayed that way long enough that I started to think the storm might have finally knocked out the whole system. Then a different sound slid into the cabin. Not words. Not at first. It was a murmur, low and indistinct, like a group of people talking just out of earshot. The volume crept up slowly, as if someone was turning a dial on the other end. I leaned closer without meaning to, straining to pick out a phrase. The longer I listened, the more the murmuring resolved into rhythm, into patterns that almost sounded like language. "Can you hear us?" someone whispered. The voice was clear now, close and cold. It did not seem to come from the speaker, but from the air just above the radio. I jerked back, heart hammering, and almost dropped the mic. "Who is this?" I managed. "Identify yourself." "Can you hear us now?" the voice repeated, a chorus of several people layered together, their words overlapping in perfect unison. It felt like the temperature in the cabin dropped 10 degrees in a heartbeat. My breath became visible, puffing out in small white clouds. The heater, which had been knocking and trying to keep up with the storm, suddenly fell silent. I fumbled for my phone with numb fingers and checked the signal. No bars, no data, just the carrier name and a blank row where my connection should have been. The outside world had been cut off, leaving me in a shaking box beside an angry dark lake and a radio full of drowned voices. The murmuring changed. It was not asking anymore. It was listing names. At first, I did not recognize them. Men's voices spoke one after another, reciting full names and ages, the way officials do when they read accident reports. Some of the names rang faint bells from the plaque in the office. Others did not. They kept coming, rolling over each other, all slightly distorted, all sounding like they were spoken through a mouth full of water. Then I heard my own name. The sound of it stopped my thoughts completely. There is something deeply wrong about hearing your name spoken in your own empty room by a stranger you cannot see. Hearing it come through static makes it worse. Hearing it spoken clearly, repeated 3 times in that layered chorus, drove a spike of ice right through my chest. My full name, age, and then a date. Not today's date. A date about 6 years from now. I did not even realize I had stood up until I felt the edge of the table dig into my thighs. The radio sat there, small and ordinary, its little green light glowing steadily. The names continued moving on as if nothing had happened. I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I yanked the power cord out of the wall. The cabin plunged into relative quiet. The storm raged outside, but the insistent, impossible voices cut off mid-syllable. I stood there, in the half-dark, heart pounding in my ears, waiting for the sound to start again. My mind kept trying to tell me that it had been a trick of the storm, some freak cross signal maybe from a Coast Guard exercise. But no training simulation would list my name tagged with a date that had not happened yet. I did not sleep that night. Every creak of the building made me flinch. I kept imagining the pressure of water pushing against the walls, the sensation of the whole cabin tilting as if it were a boat going under. When dawn finally smeared a thin line of gray over the lake, the storm had burned itself out. The water lay flat and deceptively calm, as if nothing had happened. Back at the office, the owner scolded me for unplugging the radio. He said it had to stay on during storms in case of emergencies. I wanted to tell him that was exactly why I had pulled the plug, but the words sounded insane in my head. Instead, I asked if there had been any distress calls logged that night. He frowned and checked the logbook. The pages for that date were blank, except for the Weather Channel's routine advisories. No maydays, no half-heard transmissions, nothing about the north wind. I pointed to the plaque on the wall. The engraved name stared back at me, the date of the sinking carved neatly beneath it. "Do you remember that one?" I asked. "Of course," he said quietly. "We all do. Bad storm, bad night." They found the wreck a few weeks later. Radio was smashed to bits. I left at the end of summer when school started. I told myself I was done with marinas, that I would find some part-time job far from big bodies of water and radios that speak in drowned voices. For a while, it worked. Life became lectures and assignments and cheap coffee. The lake receded to the background, just another image on tourism brochures. Then, one November night, my phone lit up at 3:17 a.m. The screen showed unknown caller. The usual options glowed, accept or decline. I stared at it, groggy and annoyed, and let it ring out. No voicemail flashed afterward. I shrugged it off and went back to sleep. The next morning, when I checked my recent calls, there was no record of it. No missed call, no entry at all. Since then, it has happened a handful of times. Always at night, always when I am alone. My phone will glow. A call will flash for a few seconds with a number that is either all zeros or a string that ends in the marina's old frequency. If I answered, there is only the sound of wind and water and muffled shouting, like someone is locked in another time begging for help that will never come. Once, just before the line went dead, a man's voice broke through the noise long enough to say one clear sentence. "We can hear you now." I changed my number after that. I stopped going anywhere near the lake. I avoid marinas entirely. It has helped, but it has not stopped everything. Occasionally, the weather app on my phone will glitch for a heartbeat, replacing the forecast with a single line. North wind, 4 souls on board, last seen, followed by coordinates that I refuse to look up. People love to say water has memory. They usually mean something poetic, about rivers, carving stones, and lakes holding reflections of the sky. But standing in that cabin with the heater dead and the radio speaking my name in a voice that should have drowned years ago, it felt like something else entirely. Not memory, not haunting, more like an echo bouncing around a space that does not care about time the way we do. When storms roll in over Lake Winnipeg now, when the wind howls and the docks groan and the town pulls its window shut against the weather, some of the old guys at the bait shop still gather with their coffee and their stories. If you listen long enough, you will hear one of them mention the drowned ones, the calls that come through on nights when the waves are highest. Most people laugh and roll their eyes. But when the laughter dies, there's always a moment where everyone goes quiet and glances at the nearest radio, just to make sure it is not lighting up on its own, whispering names that have not washed up yet. The first time my compass spun near Steinbach, I blamed cheap equipment. I was 24, working as a junior survey assistant for a small land surveying firm based out of Winnipeg. Most days I was out marking future property lines through scrubby bush and farmers' fields around southeastern Manitoba. Steinbach and the little communities around it became a second home that summer. All gravel roads, shelter belts, and endless rectangles of land someone wanted sliced into parcels. People think surveying is just walking around with a tripod and a bright vest, but the job sits somewhere between math and wandering. We followed coordinates issued by the office, planted stakes where the legal lines fell, and recorded everything into our GPS units. The work was exacting in theory, but out on the ground it meant slogging through swampy ditches, pushing through thick aspen stands and getting eaten alive by mosquitoes while staring at numbers on a screen. My crew lead, a guy named Greg, handled the main GPS rover. I carried the backup unit, pounded stakes, and flagged lines with bright tape. Our project that week was to mark the boundaries of a new rural subdivision just outside Steinbach, carving a big rectangular quarter section into future acreages. The grid looked simple on the map. Straight north-south and east-west lines. Everything squared off, no surprises. On the third day out there, the software update arrived. The office emailed new waypoint files for our handhelds, saying the client had requested some adjustments. They wanted the internal road shifted, some lot lines moved, a couple of easements added. I loaded the file into my backup unit while sitting on the tailgate of the truck, watching dust swirl on the gravel road. When the progress bar hit 100%, the screen flashed a confirmation and a new list of points appeared. We started at the southwest corner, a steel post already set years earlier. From there, it should have been a straightforward walk, following the GPS line north and hammering stakes every so often. The air buzzed with horseflies and the smell of warm earth. We pushed through waist-high grass, the shelter belt of trees ahead marking the property's edge. About 200 meters in, my unit beeped. "Point reached," it announced in its flat little voice. I frowned and glanced around. There should have been nothing special here. No corner, no jog, just the middle of a straight line. but the screen showed a waypoint labeled P901, coordinates that did not match the simple grid points I had seen earlier. I tapped through the list. P902, P93, P904. Dozens of extra points had appeared, all with the same prefix, all arranged in a neat circle according to the tiny map. "Hey, did you add any control points?" I called to Greg. He shook his head without looking up from his own unit. "Nope. Straight section, just keep going." I shrugged and kept walking, but my GPS did not like that. Every few steps, it chirped angrily, the screen flashing an arrow telling me to turn slightly, then more again. According to the device, the correct direction was curving. The breadcrumb trail I was leaving on the display began to bend gently to the right, away from the straight north line we were supposed to follow. After 50 meters of this, the undergrowth changed. The grass became thinner, the soil under my boots softer, almost spongy. The trees ahead thickened into a denser stand than the rest of the property line. Something in the light shifted too, like the sky had clouded over, even though, when I glanced up, it was still clear blue with a pale sun. "Your line is crooked," Greg called from behind me. "You're veering." "The unit says this is the line," I shot back. "You sure you loaded the same file?" He trudged up beside me and peered at my screen. His brow furrowed as he tapped through the menus. "Where did these come from?" he muttered. "P901, 902. These are not from the office." He checked his own GPS. The extra points did not appear on his. His map showed one clean, straight boundary, no curves, no circles. My unit, on the other hand, insisted that the nearest correct point lay another 20 meters ahead and slightly to the right, part of that mysterious loop of coordinates. "Maybe it glitched," he said. "Reboot it." I did. The unit powered down with a cheerful chime, then restarted. I reloaded the project file from internal storage. When the main screen came back, the circle of P9xx points still sat there, perfectly spaced, surrounding a blank center, like numbers on an invisible clock face. By then, we were too far from the truck to waste time hiking back just to swap devices. Greg sighed and told me to ignore the weird points and use the compass instead, following the bearing from the known corner. It was old school but reliable, except my compass started misbehaving too. The little metal needle that should have floated calmly toward north began to jitter as soon as we stepped deeper into the trees. At first, it just wobbled slightly, like my hands were shaking. Then it swung in a slow arc, drifting away from north and settling somewhere between east and southeast. I tapped the side of the housing. The needle swung again, this time all the way around, circling the dial before stopping at a completely different direction. "You have to be kidding me," I muttered. "Magnetic interference," Greg said, but he sounded less confident than usual. "Maybe there is an old fence line, buried wire, something. We will triangulate from the corners later. Let us stake roughly for now." We tried, we really did. But the deeper we went, the more the instruments rebelled. The GPS on my hip beeped insistently every few seconds, the arrow trying to pull me toward the circle. The compass in my hand spun and jerked like it was caught in some invisible current. Even Greg's usually rock-solid rover unit started glitching, the position jumping a meter, then 3, then 10 in random directions before snapping back. "Okay, this is pointless," he said finally, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Let us mark where we are and head out. We will come back with different gear." We planted one last stake where his unit said the line should be and tied bright tape to it. As we turned back, I checked my GPS out of habit. The tiny map now showed our breadcrumb trail curving around the circle of points in a near-perfect arc, like we had been walking along the edge of something without realizing it. At the top of that circle, one point sat slightly off-center, labeled P900. "Did you see this one before?" I asked. He shook his head. "I told you those are not ours. Forget them." I tried. I really did. That night, at home, I connected the GPS to my laptop to upload data. The office always wanted raw files as well as the clean versions, and curiosity prickled at me. I opened the point list. Our regular lot corners and line stakes were there with their familiar naming convention. At the bottom of the table, the P9LX series sat, each with its own coordinate pair. Their creation timestamps did not match the rest of the data. All of our points from that day showed a range between 1014 and 1437. The P9LX points, however, all shared the exact same timestamp. January the 1st, 2000. A default, maybe, if the unit had lost its internal clock. But the device time had been correct all day. I plotted them anyway. The software drew a perfect circle, 40 meters in radius, centered on an unremarkable patch of bush about halfway along the north boundary of the future subdivision. The P900 point sat dead center, like a bullseye. The next morning, I brought it up with our boss back in Winnipeg. He waved it off as a file corruption, told me to clear the unit and reflash the firmware. I did as he asked, but a part of me had already decided something was not right out there. The land should have been simple. Flat, predictable, cooperative. Instead, it felt like our instruments had brushed against the edge of a pattern someone else had laid down long before our grid system ever existed. A week later, we were assigned back to that same property to check a couple of lines. Different day, different weather, same coordinates. I took a brand new compass from the supply room and a different GPS unit, one that had been used mostly in town. When we approached the stretch of trees where the circle had been, the air felt heavier. Not colder exactly, but thicker. Sound seemed to deaden slightly, the noise of the highway a few kilometers away, fading until it was just a dull murmur. Or the wind that had been stirring the grass on the open field dropped away the moment we stepped under the first branches. "Feel weird?" I asked. "Stop psyching yourself out," Greg said, but he was walking a little faster than usual. My GPS map showed only our proper project points now. No mysterious P9LX series. The firmware reflashing had done its job. Still, the breadcrumb trail began to curve the same way as before, nudging us subtly off the intended straight line. I fought the urge to follow it, correcting our course every few meters to stay aligned with the boundary. At roughly the same spot where the compass had gone wild, the new one started to spin. It happened gradually, like last time. A small jitter, then a slow drift away from north. I paused and held it out, trying to keep my hand steady. The needle swung one way, then the other, then began to circle in a smooth, continuous motion, never settling. "Okay, that is not buried wire," I said quietly. "Let me see," Greg muttered, stepping closer. He held his hand over the compass but did not touch it. The needle kept circling. He took a step to the left. It kept circling. He backed away. Same motion, same impossible behavior. "We are standing on a field in the middle of nowhere," I said. "There's nothing here." "Old survey markers," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Maybe the government did something weird here back in the day. Geomagnetic tests. Who knows?" "Then why are our points trying to form a circle around it?" I asked. "Twice." He did not answer. We marked the minimum we had to that day and left early. Neither of us wanted to linger. On the drive back along the gravel road, I looked out the window at the stand of trees that hid the circular anomaly. The tops swayed slightly, out of sync with the wind moving through the fields. For a heartbeat, the whole cluster seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from asphalt, even though it was not that warm. Over the next few months, I noticed something else. Whenever our firm got a new job near Steinbach, the mapping software would sometimes hang for a moment before generating waypoints. The status bar would freeze at 99%, then jump to finished. If I dug into the metadata, there would be a blip, a fraction of a second call to some external data set that did not have a clear name. It did not show up for jobs anywhere else. I asked one of the senior surveyors about it once. He stared at my screen for a long time, then quietly told me to stop looking at that stuff and to focus on the coordinates I was given. "Why?" I asked. "Do you know what it is?" He hesitated. then said something that stuck with me. Before you were hired, there was another assistant out on that same quarter section, different crew. Their GPS logged a similar circle. They went to check the center point. He did not come back right away. A chill ran up my spine. What do you mean? They said he got disoriented, the senior surveyor replied. Walked in circles for over an hour within a 50-meter patch, even with the others shouting to him. His unit showed him moving in straight lines. Their units showed him looping. They eventually grabbed him and pulled him out. He quit that week. Did anyone check the spot? I asked. Once, he said. They sent a guy from head office with some special equipment. He was here for 2 days. After that, we were told to treat that area as a no-set zone. We can run lines past it, but we do not put markers inside a certain radius. Easier to just let the client's fences go around it. He closed the laptop, ending the conversation. Sometimes, when I cannot sleep, I pull up the satellite imagery of that field. The resolution is not great, but you can see the faint lines of plowed rows, the linear scars of drainage ditches, the rectangular chunks of development creeping closer. Right in the middle of one section, though, there's an odd patch where the soil always looks slightly different. In every season's image, snow, thaw, full summer, that patch has a subtle circular outline. Clients will build houses along the road, put up mailboxes, plant trees. The subdivision will fill in, lot by lot. Kids will ride bikes past that stand of older trees in the middle of their tidy grid. Someone will eventually ask why no one ever put a house there, why the lot lines bend around that particular patch of bush instead of cutting right through it like everywhere else. Maybe someone will decide wasted space is wasted money. Maybe they will send out another survey crew with brand new units and fresh batteries, confident that whatever weirdness used to sit there has faded with time. Maybe their compasses will spin, their maps will glitch, their breadcrumb trails will begin to arc in ways that do not match any straight line. As for me, I lasted one more season. I told myself I was leaving for better pay, for an office job that would be easier on my knees. That was partly true, but it was also because every time I entered a new coordinate set near Steinbach, I could not shake the feeling that something else was watching those numbers too, shifting them by fractions of a degree, nudging us around the edge of a circle no one wanted to admit was there. Our work is supposed to impose order, grids, and bearings and measured distances on land that does not care. Out there, in that stand of trees, it felt like the land had quietly drawn its own shape, and our instruments, despite all their technology, were just trying not to lie about it. The first time I saw it on Highway 10, I thought it was just some idiot hitchhiker playing games in the dark. I was 26 then, running night deliveries between Brandon and a string of small farming towns that barely showed up as dots on the map. It was routine work. Load the truck at the warehouse, drive north on Highway 10, with occasional side roads branching off to grain elevators and gas stations, then loop back in the early hours when most of Manitoba was asleep. Night driving out there has its own rhythm. The radio low, the hum of the tires, the steady sweep of headlights over endless ditches and fields. Once you clear the last real glow of Brandon, the world shrinks down to whatever fits inside the beam in front of you. On some stretches, you can drive 10 minutes without seeing another pair of headlights. For most people, that idea feels lonely. For me, it was a kind of peace. The first shift where things went wrong started like any other. It was late October, the kind of night where the air carried that damp cold that crawled into your jacket no matter how high you zipped it. The sky above the highway was a uniform black, clouds swallowing any hint of stars. I had a full load, boxes for a hardware store in one town, groceries for a co-op in another, some auto parts for a mechanic who liked to talk too much about carburetors. By the time I hit the long northern stretch of Highway 10, the dashboard clock read 11:42 p.m. The road was dry, the ditches frosted, my thermos still half full of bad coffee. I knew every landmark by then, the crooked sign for a side road, The stand of trees leaning into the ditch. The single lonely yard light that marked a farm set far back from the highway. I knew where my high beams would catch the reflector posts and where they would hit nothing but emptiness. About halfway between two little towns, there's a stretch of road that always felt longer than it should. No crossroads, no houses, just pavement and fields and occasional sloping coulees where snow would drift high in winter. There is a kilometer marker there, small and unremarkable, that I used as a mental checkpoint. See that? And you know you are entering the loneliest part of the run. That night, as my headlights swept over the reflective numbers on that post, I saw someone standing next to it. At first, it barely registered. Just a shape at the edge of the beam, a dark form where there should have been nothing. My brain wrote it off as a trick of shadows. Then the figure turned, or at least shifted enough that the pale oval of a face caught the light for a second. A person. Standing perfectly still, right next to the highway, in the middle of nowhere. I eased off the accelerator without thinking, foot hovering over the brake. My mind did the quick math. Maybe a stranded driver. Maybe someone whose vehicle had gone into the ditch. But there was no car. No hazard lights strobing red in the dark. Just that motionless figure and the flat sweep of empty fields beyond. The closer I got, the stranger it looked. The person, if it was a person, stood facing the road, but their body seemed slightly too tall, the limbs oddly proportioned under a dark coat or jacket. The head was angled down like they were staring at their own feet. I did not see any reflective material, no bag, no sign they had been walking. It was as if they had grown out of the frost beside the marker. I flipped my high beams to low as I passed, more out of habit than anything, and turned my head just enough to look. In that split second as my truck went by, the figure snapped its head up and looked directly at me. I cannot tell you what color its eyes were, what the exact features of the face looked like. My brain refused to hold on to the details. All I remember is the impression of something too intent, too aware, like being caught in the sights of a predator. The skin looked wrong too smooth, almost like there was a thin layer of frost on it that did not melt under the lights. I kept driving. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles pale against the dark vinyl. In the mirror, the road behind me was just twin lines of light receding into darkness. No figure, no movement, nothing. I told myself over and over that it was just some drunk from a nearby farm, maybe walking home after a fight, maybe too stubborn to call for a ride. Out here, you see all kinds of poor decisions. Still, I could not shake the feeling of those eyes. As I rolled into the next town and backed up to the loading dock, my heart was still ticking faster than it should have. The store's back door opened, a blast of warm light, and the familiar smell of cardboard and dust washing over me. The town looked so normal. Streetlights, a couple of parked trucks, the faint glow of a TV in an upstairs window. It was hard to connect it with the stretch of road where something had stood perfectly still in the night, waiting by a post that most people never noticed. I did not mention it to anyone. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I saw a weird guy standing in the dark. It sounded like nothing. It felt like everything. 2 nights later, I saw it again. Same run, same route, same hour on the dashboard clock. As the kilometer marker came into view, my chest tightened instinctively. The beam of my headlights washed over the post, and there it was. The same figure, in the same spot, leaning slightly closer to the pavement this time, like it had taken one hesitant step toward the road. The differences were small but unmistakable. The head was tilted to the side now, as if listening. The arms hung straighter. It was like looking at a mannequin that someone had nudged between 2 photos. Adrenaline hit so hard, it made my fingertips tingle. I forced myself not to slow down, not to change anything. If I acted like I had seen it, some part of me was sure it would react. At the last second, the figure's head twitched, tracking the truck without the rest of the body moving. It did not raise its arms. It did not step out. It just watched, neck twisting a little farther than felt natural. I did not sleep well that day. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that bent head straightening as my truck approached, those eyes lifting, something very patient behind them. I told myself I would report it to a trooper or someone in town, ask if anyone else had seen a stranger hanging around that stretch. But when I got to the community detachment a few afternoons later, the words tangled up in my throat. I ended up asking about road conditions instead. The third time it appeared, there was no pretending it was random. A week had passed. Snow flurries danced in the high beams, swirling like ghostly insects. The highway felt narrower, bordered by patches of white that reflected light back up at weird angles. As I approached that familiar kilometer, my hands went slick on the wheel. Part of me wanted to take a different route altogether, add an extra hour to the run just to avoid that place. Another part of me needed to know, needed to see if it was there again. It was. This time the figure stood closer to the shoulder, 1 foot almost on the painted line. The head was already up, waiting. Even from a distance, it felt less like a person and more like a shape designed to look like one. The proportions were off, limbs slightly too long, torso a bit too short. The shadow it cast on the snow beside it did not match the angle of my headlights. As I drew level with it, something else changed. The radio cut out. 1 second, music played softly in the cab. The next, there was only a blank humming silence. The dash lights dimmed a fraction, then steadied. The engine sound went thin and strained, like I was suddenly climbing a steep hill, even though the road was flat. For a heartbeat, it felt like the truck was pushing through something thicker than air. The figure's head turned with unnatural smoothness, tracking me. Its mouth opened slightly. I did not see teeth. I did not see a tongue. The inside looked too dark, like someone had painted the space behind its lips with something that absorbed light. I floored the accelerator. The truck responded with a reluctant surge, engine roaring. The pressure against the front of the cab eased, only when the figure dropped out of my side vision. In the mirror, the highway stretched empty and straight. The kilometer marker glow faded into the distance. I considered quitting that night. The pay was not worth feeling like prey on a route I had once driven half asleep, but small-town jobs are not easy to come by, and it is easier to talk yourself out of fear in daylight. By the time my alarm went off that evening, I'd already half convinced myself I was overreacting, that maybe some local kid was messing around with a costume or a mannequin, moving it a little each night to freak drivers out. That illusion shattered a week later when news started to spread. Another driver, who sometimes shared the route with me, failed to check in. He ran slightly earlier than I did, hauling produce and frozen goods to many of the same places. When he did not arrive at his last stop, the store called dispatch. Dispatch called the troopers. Hours passed. They found his truck sitting on the shoulder near that same kilometer marker. The engine was still running. The driver's door was open. The headlights pointed down the highway, shining on nothing. His phone sat in the cup holder, his wallet still in the console. No signs of a struggle. No footprints in the fresh, powdery snow leading away from the cab. Not even the usual boot impressions you expect around a stopped vehicle. It was as if he had stepped out and then simply ceased to exist. I drove past the scene on my next run, rerouted temporarily to drop a load further south. Patrol cars flanked the shoulder. Flashing lights painted the snow red and blue. Through the gap between two vehicles, I caught a glimpse of the empty truck, my eyes darting automatically to the kilometer marker. The figure was gone. For the next few nights, that spot looked normal again. Just a metal post and a patch of ditch. The snow there more churned up than usual from all the official vehicles that had parked and turned around. The radio stayed on. The engine did not strain. My headlights swept past with nothing in their way. If I had not lived through the weeks before, I might have believed that nothing strange had ever happened there. I switched routes after that. I told dispatch that the news about the missing driver had rattled me, that I needed a break from Highway 10. They shrugged and shifted me to deliveries closer to the city. No one questioned it much. People out there are used to the idea that a bad patch of road can get under your skin. Sometimes I still check news feeds for updates on that disappearance. They never found him. The reports mention weather conditions, personal history, last known locations. They talk about hypothermia, about the possibility he wandered off disoriented. They do not talk about the fact that there were no tracks in the snow. They do not talk about the way radios sometimes go quiet for a heartbeat when rigs roll past that lonely kilometer. Every once in a while, when I cannot sleep, I pull up dash cam footage from my old runs that I kept out of habit. Most of it is boring, just pavement and reflective posts and the occasional set of headlights passing the other way. On 3 of those files, though, there is a strange glitch. Right at that particular marker, the video stutters, freezes for 2 seconds, then jumps ahead. In those missing frames, there should be a glimpse of a shape at the edge of the beam. Instead, there is only a smear of static and a single frozen image where the snow beside the post seems darker, like a shadow of a person with its head bowed. I do not drive nights on Highway 10 anymore, but whenever the weather turns and the days get shorter, I hear stories in truck stops. A new driver mentioning a weird feeling near a certain marker, another talking about a spot where their rig feels heavier for no reason. Someone saying they saw a man standing in the ditch just for a second, who was not there when they looked again. They always say it like a joke, shrugging it off before the conversation moves on. Nobody wants to give shape to the idea that something might be waiting along that stretch, learning the rhythm of trucks and the habits of drivers, growing more curious each year. If you ask me where I think that missing man went, I cannot give you an answer that will make sense. All I know is that some places on long highways do not feel empty, no matter how little there is to see. And sometimes, what waits in those places starts by standing beside a post and watching. Then one night, it decides to step a little closer to the line. When I first moved into the old house in Swan River, the only thing that bothered me was the wallpaper. The place had been chopped into 3 rentals sometime in the late 70s, and every unit still wore a different era on its walls. Mine had yellowed floral paper in the hallway, a kitchen that smelled faintly of old grease, and crooked door frames that made every room feel a little off. But the rent was cheap, utilities were included, and the building sat within walking distance of my job at the pharmacy. In a town where vacancy signs were rare, that was enough. The landlord, a man in his 60s named Ron, met me in the front entry the day I moved in. He had that distracted, half-apologetic air of someone who had owned a place too long and knew every flaw personally. He handed over the keys, walked me through the basics, how hard to jiggle the back door, which breaker not to touch, which baseboard heater to leave on low all winter so the pipes did not freeze. As we stood at the bottom of the staircase that led up to the 2nd floor, he pointed at a door halfway up, its edges sealed with old, cracked caulking and 3 long nails driven at an angle into the frame. "Do not mess with that one," he said. "It is just an old storage room. The floor is not safe. I keep it shut for a reason." The door itself was unremarkable. Plain wood, no handle, just a scar where one had been. Someone had painted over it the same beige as the walls years ago. If not for the nails, I might have thought it was just a weird wall panel. "I am not planning on exploring," I said. "I have enough boxes to unpack." He nodded, satisfied, and left with a muttered reminder about the garbage pickup schedule. My unit took up the main floor, living room at the front, small bedroom at the back, kitchen tucked between them. The other 2 units sat upstairs, one on each side of the hall. I met the woman in 2A that first week, a quiet hairdresser who worked out of town. The door to 2B remained closed. Sometimes I heard music behind it, sometimes angry phone calls, but I never saw that tenant come or go. It was a few weeks before I started hearing the noises. At first, I chalked it up to old house sounds, the creaks and groans of wood contracting in the cold, pipes knocking, distant bass from someone's TV. But these sounds had a pattern. It usually started around 3 in the morning. a slow dragging noise above my bedroom ceiling, like something heavy being pulled across rough floorboards. It would go on for a few seconds, stop, then start again somewhere else in the same overhead space. I told myself it was the tenant in 2B moving furniture around at weird hours. People have strange habits. Working nights at the pharmacy had taught me that much. The dragging became my strange upstairs neighbor's quirk, filed away in my mind as annoying but harmless. Then the crying began. The first time I heard it, I sat bolt upright in bed with my heart racing. It sounded like a child, high, broken sobs muffled by distance. Not loud, but clear enough that I could hear the hitching gasps between breaths. The sound seemed to bleed straight down through the ceiling, not from one side or the other, but from directly above my bed. I grabbed my phone, checked the time, 3:07 a.m., then listened. The crying went on for a full minute, then cut off abruptly, as if someone had flipped a switch. Silence filled the room, heavy and complete, broken only by the faint hum of the fridge. The next day, I asked the woman from 2A if anyone in 2B had kids. "No idea," she said, lighting a cigarette on the front step. "I've barely talked to him. Think he works nights. Why?" "Just heard something," I said, leaving it at that. I did not want to be the crazy downstairs neighbor who complained about phantom children. The pattern continued. A few nights of nothing, then dragging sounds, always near 3. Sometimes the crying, sometimes not. Once, I could have sworn I heard a low voice murmuring over the sobs, too muffled to make out words. The sound seemed to seep through the ceiling and the walls at the same time, as if the building itself was carrying it. After a month, I decided to talk to Ron. He showed up in his usual faded parka, smelling faintly of engine oil, and listened with his arms crossed as I described the noises. He nodded along at first, then shook his head. "Nobody has been in 2B for 3 weeks, he said. "He skipped on the rent. I just changed the locks 2 days ago." I stared at him. "Then who is dragging furniture around at 3 in the morning?" "It is an old place," he said with forced patience. "You would be surprised how much noise a furnace can make. And sound travels weird in these walls. It echoes." "What about the storage room?" I asked, surprising myself. "The one you nailed shut. Is there a crawl space above my unit?" His expression tightened. "That room is sealed. Has been for years. Like I told you, the floor is bad. Nothing up there but junk." "Then why can I hear things directly above my bedroom?" I pressed. "Not to the side, not down the hall. Right above." He shifted his weight, clearly regretting coming over. "If it makes you feel better, I will have a look at the attic hatch when I am here next," he said. "But I am telling you, there is nobody up there. If the noises bother you, get some earplugs or a fan." He left soon after, leaving me standing in my kitchen, the faint smell of cold air and cigarette smoke leaking in from the hallway. That night, the dragging started again. This time, it was louder. The sound scraped across the ceiling in a line that matched the length of my bed. The hairs on my arms stood up. I lay there holding my breath, every muscle tense. Then, soft as a sigh, something thumped against the ceiling right above my head. Once, twice, 3 times, in a slow, measured rhythm. It felt deliberate. The next morning, I noticed something else. One of my mugs was missing. It was a stupid thing to fixate on. A chipped blue mug I always kept on the second shelf above the counter. I reached for it while making coffee and found an empty spot. I checked the sink, the drying rack, even the trash, thinking I might have broken it and forgotten. Nothing. The mug was just gone. Over the next few days, other small things disappeared. A spoon from the drawer, a paperback from my nightstand, a pair of socks I knew I had dropped in the laundry basket. Each absence was minor on its own, the kind of thing a person misplaces all the time, but they formed a trail in my head that led nowhere, until the stain appeared. I was changing my sheets when I saw it. A faint yellow-brown discoloration in the shape of a rough oval on the ceiling above my bed. It had not been there when I moved in. At first, I thought it was water damage. the kind of leak stain you get from a slow drip, but the color did not match the usual pattern. It was darker in the center, almost like something had soaked through from above and then stopped. The next time I heard the dragging, I could not stand it anymore. I got out of bed, pulled on my robe, and grabbed the broom. Standing on the mattress, I jabbed the bristles at the stain. "Cut it out," I shouted, feeling ridiculous. "Whatever you're doing up there, stop." The dragging ceased immediately. For a moment, the silence felt like a held breath. Then, faintly, I heard a muffled thud, followed by what sounded like a small object rolling across wood and coming to rest directly above where I had poked. The next morning, there was a new bulge in the ceiling, subtle, but definitely there. The plaster sagged slightly, as if something small and heavy pressed against it from the other side. I called Ron again. This time I did not mention crying or dragging or stains shaped like nothing I wanted to think about. I told him there might be a leak or a dead animal in the ceiling, that the plaster looked like it might collapse. He agreed to come by with a ladder. He showed up 2 days later, grumbling about his truck and the weather. He looked at the bulge, poked it with a finger, and frowned. "Probably just old plaster," he said. "I will patch it when it cracks. No sense tearing everything up now." "What about the storage room?" I asked. "If there is a problem, it has to be above there, right? Can you just open it and check?" He stiffened. "That door stays shut," he said. "Trust me on that." "Why?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Because the floor is bad? Or because of whatever makes those noises at 3 in the morning?" He stared at me for a long moment, something guarded in his eyes. "You knew there were other people living here when you signed the lease," he said finally. "Old houses make sounds. If you do not like it, I can let you out of your contract when I find someone else. But I'm not ripping apart that room because you heard a bump in the night." He left before I could reply. I lasted 1 more week. The turning point came on a Wednesday. I got home from a late shift to find my front door locked as usual. But when I stepped inside, the living room felt wrong. The lamp was on, casting the room in a soft gold. I always left it off to save power. The throw blanket I kept folded on the couch lay crumpled on the floor. The remote sat on the armrest, pointed at the TV. I checked the windows, all latched. The back door, still jiggly but locked. Nothing seemed taken. My jewelry box sat untouched. My laptop was where I had left it. Yet the air felt subtly displaced, as if someone had been there only minutes before. Trying not to panic, I walked through the apartment, checking each room. In the bedroom, the bulge in the ceiling above the bed was larger, the plaster more cracked. And there, in the center of the sagging spot, a small fragment had flaked away, revealing the faint outline of something pressed firmly against the other side. White ceramic. The chipped curve of a blue mug. I did not sleep there that night. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the knob, and lay awake listening. The dragging started as usual around 3, but this time it was accompanied by a faint clinking, like dishes bumping together. Somewhere above my head, in a sealed room no one was supposed to enter, something moved my things around. 2 days later, when Ron came to fix a dripping faucet, I cornered him near the stairs. "I want to see what is in there," I said, nodding at the nailed-shut door. "Either you open it, or I'm calling the police and telling them I think someone is living in your walls." His jaw worked, a muscle jumping near his temple. For a moment, I thought he might actually raise his voice. Instead, his shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. "Fine," he muttered. "But do not touch anything, and when you see it, do not say I did not warn you." He fetched a pry bar from his truck, pulled the nails with practiced motions, and scraped at the old paint sealing the edges. The door stuck for a second, then opened with a groan, exhaling a smell of dust, old wood, and something metallic beneath it all. The room beyond was smaller than I expected. Low ceiling, unfinished boards, no proper floor in the middle, just joists and exposed lath. Directly over my bedroom, a section of rough planks had been laid across the beams like a makeshift platform. Sitting on that platform, arranged in a careful, uneven row, were my missing items. The blue mug, the spoon, the paperback, warped from humidity. The socks, balled neatly. A hair tie I did not even realize was gone. The objects formed a line that led toward the far wall, where a darker stain spread from a corner down into the beams. Thick iron rings were bolted into two of those beams, remnants of restraints removed long ago. Teenagers used to break in up here in the 80s, Ron said hoarsely behind me. Before I sealed it, I thought they were just partying. Then one of them brought a friend. She went to the RCMP, said they had been using this place long before that, bringing girls up, locking them in, doing worse. The investigation got messy. The owner lost the building. I bought it at auction. They told me it was over, that there was nothing left to find. He gestured helplessly at the platform. I sealed it so nobody could get in, he said. Figured if I kept it shut, it would stay shut. I stared at the line of my things, the way each one sat exactly in the center of a board, as if placed by someone who valued symmetry. Beyond the platform, the ceiling above bowed down slightly. The underside of my bedroom ceiling. In one spot, a ceramic chip was wedged into a crack, pressed outward. Who has been up here? I whispered. No one, he said. That door has not been opened since I nailed it. I am the only one with a key. The upstairs tenants do not even know it is here. The hatch in the attic is blocked. There is no other way in. We stood there, in that small, stale space, listening. For a moment, I heard nothing. Then very softly, from somewhere between the walls, came the sound of fabric scraping against wood. A small choked sob followed, as if someone was crying into a pillow just out of sight. I moved out within a month. I found a smaller, more expensive place closer to the highway, one with modern drywall and no locked doors in the hall. Ron let me break the lease without argument. The last time I saw him, he was standing in the front yard, staring up at the boarded window above my old bedroom, an expression on his face that I did not know how to read. Sometimes, late at night in my new apartment, I wake up at 3:07 a.m. with my heart pounding. The room is quiet, the ceiling smooth and free of stains. Still, I lie there waiting, listening for the faint scrape of something being dragged overhead, for the muffled sound of someone sobbing in a space no one has used in years. I keep my things in drawers now, doors shut, cupboards latched. Every few days, I do a quick count of my mugs, my spoons, my books, just to make sure they are all still there. So far, nothing has gone missing. But every time I walk past an older house in Swan River, the ones with crooked eaves and too many doors, I cannot help glancing up at the windows above the main floor, wondering which rooms are still nailed shut, which ceilings hide platforms built for purposes nobody wants to admit, and whether in some of them, someone, or something that remembers being someone, is still collecting small objects from tenants below, laying them in careful lines on old boards while the rest of the house pretends it is just the furnace making noise. The story of the tracks started long before I ever pointed a snowmobile at the ice outside Flin Flon. Every winter, the same warnings came out as soon as the lakes froze over. Check your thickness. Stay off the pressure ridges. Do not trust dark patches. But mixed in with those practical rules was one that always made the older guys at the shop go quiet. End of season, when the ice goes gray, my uncle would say, if you see a single set of tracks heading out with no starting point and no sled, you do not follow them. You turn around and you go home. When I was a kid, it sounded like superstition, something grown men told each other so they could feel like they knew where death started and where safety ended. Over time, the story of the tracks picked up details. Some people said they belonged to a local hotshot from the 80s who thought he could outrun the thaw and dropped through a rotten patch seconds ahead of his buddies. Others claimed it went further back than that, to a trapper who vanished on spring ice in the 50s. His body never recovered, only a long, unbroken line of machine prints leading out to open water. By the time I turned 17, the story had become more of a dare than a warning. It was late March, that ugly part of the season where the snowbanks are gray and the lakes wear a patchwork of meltwater and slush. Officially, nobody was supposed to be riding on the ice anymore. Unofficially, half the town still did. The surface froze solid overnight and turned to soup under the afternoon sun, a cycle everyone pretended not to understand when something went wrong. That day started clear and cold. The thermometer sat just below freezing at dawn, promising a few more decent hours before the crust softened. My friends and I met at the edge of the big lake, machines idling in puffs of white exhaust that hung low in the still air. There were 4 of us: me, my cousin Dan, and 2 guys from school, Liam and Reese, all bundled in layers that made us look interchangeable at a distance. We had heard the same story our whole lives. Maybe that is why when Liam suggested we go see where the famous tracks start, nobody told him to shut up and go home. Instead, we laughed and swapped stories on the throttle, each repeating a slightly different version of the legend. We followed the established trail out from the boat launch, a hard-packed track beaten flat by weeks of traffic. As the shoreline receded, the town shrank into a cluster of colored boxes, the mine head frame a thin spike against the sky. The ice stretched out in all directions, a flat, bright sheet broken only by old snowmobile ruts and the occasional jagged hump where ice had buckled. About 20 minutes out, we veered off the main trail, cutting fresh lines through shallow drifts. The sun had only just cleared the trees behind us, and the ice still held the cold of the night. Our skis hissed over the crust. Every sound seemed amplified. The engines, the crunch of snow, the distant crack of shifting pressure, ridges like gunshots. We did not need GPS to find the place. Every local knew the rough area from the stories. A wide, open patch of lake between 2 low, tree-covered islands, far enough from shore that the town looked like a thin smudge. It was the kind of emptiness that swallowed sound and sense. Dan was the first to spot them. He pulled up short and cut his engine, arm raised. The rest of us coasted in beside him, our machine settling into the snow with soft huffs. Ahead, cutting across the subtle texture of wind-drifted ice, a single set of snowmobile tracks appeared as if from nowhere. They ran straight out from the empty expanse of lake toward the open horizon. No approach marks, no churn start, just twin runner lines with a center tread, crisp and sharp as if a sled had passed minutes before. The snow around them lay untouched. No boot prints, no other machines, nothing. "I thought this was just some story," Liam said, his breath visible in the air despite the balaclava. I stepped off my sled and crouched beside one of the prints. The edges were clean, the pattern from the track fully defined. I could see the exact shape of the lugs, the little notches where snow had been compressed and released. When I brushed my glove across one, it flaked like dry sugar. "These are fresh," I said. "This morning, maybe." "Maybe it is just someone messing with people," Reese said. "Start from farther back, smooth out the lead in with a shovel or something. Make it look like it comes from nowhere." "Then where's their sled?" Dan asked. "We are the only ones out this way. There is nowhere to hide out here." He was right. The lake stretched flat to the low, distant smudge of the far shore. No shacks, no pressure ridges big enough to hide behind, no clusters of parked machines. The tracks ran straight and true, a perfect line. They did not waver. They did not wander. They just went. "Let us follow them a bit," Liam said. "We do not have to go far. Just see if they curve back or something." Every story I had heard hit me at once. "Do not follow them. Turn around. Go home." "Bad idea," I said. "The ice is not great out there. You know that." "It froze hard last night," Liam countered. "We will go slow. First sign of slush, we turn back." "What? You scared of a ghost sled?" He said it with a grin, trying to turn it into a joke, but his eyes kept flicking to the horizon. In the end, we did what stupid teenagers have always done when faced with a bad decision wrapped in a dare. We compromised in the worst way possible. "Couple 100 meters," Dan said. "That is it. If it starts to look sketchy, we turn. All together. No hero stuff." We fired up the sleds and pointed them along the phantom trail. From the seat, the tracks looked even stranger. They were too perfect, every print identical, as if the sled had not bounced, not once, over the natural irregularities of the ice. I have ridden enough to know no machine glides that smoothly over real conditions. Even at a crawl, you feel the subtle rises and dips. Whoever had made those tracks seemed to have floated instead of rolled. We kept our speed down. The ice under us groaned occasionally, long, drawn-out notes that vibrated up through the skis. Here and there, old cracks showed as thin, dark lines, sealed by repeated thaw and refreeze. I watched for wet patches, for that ugly, grainy look that means the surface has turned to rotten honeycomb. For the first stretch, everything looked deceptively solid. Then the sound of an engine joined us, not one of ours. A second tone, high and thin, seemed to come from somewhere ahead. It rose and fell in pitch like a machine revving, but no sled moved on the horizon. The four of us slowed further, the unspoken agreement thick between us. The phantom engine noise matched our pace for a few seconds, then surged ahead, fading into the emptiness. "Tell me you heard that," Reese said over the radio. "Wind," Liam said quickly, too quickly. "Sound bouncing off the ice. You know how it is." The air was dead still. We had covered maybe 300 meters when Dan held up his hand again. He pointed with his chin at the ice directly in front of us. The tracks continued, as crisp as ever. But the surface around them had changed. A faint sheen glistened on the ice ahead, catching the low sun at a different angle. When I eased my sled forward a few feet and put a boot down, the snow under the crust gave with a wet, unsettling sigh. Water welled up through a hairline crack near my toe. "Slush," I said. "We are done." We stopped there, engines idling, the ghost tracks still stretching out in a perfect line over increasingly suspect ice. There was no sign of them ending, no abrupt break, no chaotic scatter of marks that would indicate a turn or a stop. They just went, straight as a rule, toward a part of the lake where I knew the current chewed from below. "Whoever made these is in the water by now," Dan said quietly. "If anyone made them," Reese muttered. We turned back. We did it carefully. Wide arcs that kept us on the driest-looking patches, skis hissing, tracks leaving messy, human evidence over the hard crust. Nobody talked much on the way toward shore. The weight of the empty space ahead of those prints pressed between my shoulder blades, urging me not to look over my shoulder. Every time the ice cracked with a distant report, my heart slammed against my ribs. Back on land, the story morphed again. As the years went by, I heard other versions. Some said a group of teens once followed the tracks all the way to open water and barely made it back. Others claimed you could see a sled still running in tight circles under the ice if you looked down in just the right late-season light. I did not talk much about that morning. When I did, I left out the phantom engine, the way the print seemed too perfect, too deliberate. It sounded like the kind of exaggeration everyone assumed sat on top of a kernel of truth in these kinds of tales. A few years later, I joined the local search and rescue team. Most of the work was on land, lost hunters, overdue hikers, kids who wandered off. But every late winter, when the ice went gray and the warnings went out, we would get calls about machines through the surface. In those cases, the pattern started to bother me. Almost every late-season incident happened along a narrow, invisible band on that same part of the lake. Different distances from shore, different directions of travel. But when you plotted the coordinates on a map, a rough line emerged. It was not perfect, but it followed the path I remembered from that morning more closely than randomness should allow. The older volunteers would not talk about it much. When I brought it up once in the truck on the way back from a recovery, my captain just shook his head. "Some places on these lakes have always been bad," he said. "Old current patterns, springs, who knows? The stories grow around them. People remember the stories more than the science. But you do not ride there, I said. No, he admitted. I do not. Last March, we went out after a rider who had ignored all the late ice warnings. The call came from his friend, voice shaky over the phone. Said he had watched the back end of the sled drop without warning, no cracking, no time to turn. By the time we got there, the only thing left was a weak upheaval in the slush and a helmet bobbing slowly near a widening hole. When we marked the coordinates for the incident log, my stomach clenched. The point sat almost exactly where those ghost tracks had been heading years earlier. At home that night, I pulled out the old paper map I had once traced our teenage ride on with a red pen. I measured roughly from the islands, from the shoreline bends. The line I had drawn then, following memory and a sense of unease, intersected almost perfectly with the dot from the latest call. I do not ride on that lake in late March anymore, when young guys at the shop brag about their machines and talk about one last rip just to see the tracks. I hear my uncle's voice in my own when I tell them what not to do. They always laugh a little, roll their eyes, say they will be careful. Nobody out there thinks they're the one who will become part of the story. Maybe the tracks really are just the pattern of weak ice, the visible trace of physics and bad judgment. Maybe some late-season surface melts in a way that preserves one machine's prints longer than the rest, making it look like they come from nowhere and go to nowhere. The rational explanations exist. They always do, on paper. But some mornings, when a cold snap hits after a warm spell and the lake looks deceptively solid again, I walk down to the shoreline and scan the white expanse. Every so often, far out between those two low islands, I see a faint, dark line, straight as if drawn with a ruler, where no one should have been riding that day. It is probably old tracks, frozen and refrozen, dragged out and distorted by wind. That is what I tell myself as I turn away. Still, I never stand there for long. The idea of looking too long into that empty strip of ice, of feeling the subtle hum of a phantom engine growing louder in the back of my mind, feels too much like stepping back onto a path that has already claimed more than enough people. And if I ever see a single set of fresh prints there again, appearing out of nothing and stretching toward the horizon, I know exactly what I will do. I will turn around. I will go home. The first time I walked through the house in Portage la Prairie, I knew it before the landlord even opened the door. Not just in the vague way that old houses all feel similar, but in a detailed, bone-deep recognition that made the hair on my arms rise under my jacket. I had seen it in my dreams. For 2 weeks before that viewing, I had been having the same recurring nightmare. I would find myself standing in a narrow entryway with scuffed hardwood, a staircase rising on the right and a hallway stretching straight ahead. On the left, an open doorway led to a living room with a big front window and an outdated ceiling fan. The hall opened into a kitchen with green cabinets chipped at the corners. Past that, a short corridor ended where a door should have been, except in the dream it was just blank wall. I would always wake up just as I reached out to touch that smooth, wrong spot, my fingers tingling as if they had brushed something that was there and not there at the same time. When my partner and I answered the ad for a character rental, affordable close to downtown, I did not put any of that together. I was just thinking about money, about how much cheaper it would be to live out of the city. The landlord, a woman in her 50s dressed in a bulky sweater, met us on the front step and juggled keys while explaining about the furnace and the parking pad. The house looked like 100 other older places on Manitoba streets. 2 stories, peeling paint, sagging porch. Then she opened the door and stepped aside, and the déjà vu hit me so hard I had to grip the railing. Same narrow entryway, same staircase on the right. Same hallway ahead, same left-hand doorway into a living room with a big front window and an outdated ceiling fan that wobbled slightly even when still. "You okay?" my partner Eric murmured. "Just dizzy," I lied. We walked through the main floor as the landlord talked about square footage and recent upgrades that did not look very recent. Every corner, every scuff on the baseboards, every crooked light switch I recognized. The kitchen cabinets were the same chipped green from my dreams. The fridge sat in the same slightly wrong place, jutting into the doorway. Even the pattern of wear on the linoleum matched. When we reached the short hallway at the back, my chest tightened. To the left, a small bedroom. To the right, a cramped bathroom. Straight ahead, the corridor ended in a flat wall painted the same color as the rest. No door. No trim. Nothing. Exactly like in the dream. I thought there was a room here, I blurted, then immediately regretted it. The landlord glanced at me. There used to be another small bedroom back there years ago, but the previous owner had it removed to make space for plumbing. It is all wall now. You must have read an old listing. Right, I said. That must be it. We took the place, of course. Rents were rising everywhere, and Portage offered a shorter commute than Winnipeg on paper. The first few nights, we slept on a mattress on the floor, stacks of boxes lining the walls. I told myself the unease I felt was just moving stress, not the sense that the house had been waiting for us. The first weird thing was the pictures. We had not unpacked much yet. A couple of kitchen boxes, a bag of clothes, basic toiletries in the bathroom. Our framed photos, vacation shots, family portraits, a dumb picture of Eric holding a cat that always made me laugh, were still wrapped in newspaper in a cardboard box by the door. On the fourth day, I came home from work to find 3 of those pictures already hanging on the living room wall. They were straight, spaced evenly, each on a nail. The one of us at the lake sat above the couch we had only just pushed into place that morning. A childhood photo of me with missing front teeth hung by the hallway. The cat picture was on the little wall between the living room and the kitchen, exactly at the height I normally put things. I stood there for a long minute, grocery bag cutting into my hand, heartbeat thudding in my ears. "Very funny," I said when Eric came in behind me. "How did you even find the time?" He frowned, following my gaze. "Find the time for what?" "The pictures," I said. "Hanging them. You could have at least waited until we were both here." "I did not hang anything," he said. "I have been at work all day, same as you." I dropped the groceries on the counter and went straight to the box by the door. The remaining frames sat there, still wrapped, no dust, no disturbance. When I checked the backs of the ones on the wall, the newspaper and tape were gone, the frames cool to the touch. "How would the landlord even get in?" Eric asked when I suggested it. "And why would she hang our pictures for us?" I had no answer that did not sound like a bad joke or a worse story. We checked the doors and windows, all locked, no signs of entry. Eventually, we shrugged it off as some odd oversight we must have made. Maybe I had hung them and forgotten in the chaos of moving. It seemed impossible but acceptable in that stretched logic of exhaustion. The dreams returned that night. Same sequence. Entryway, living room, kitchen, short hall. This time, though, the blank wall at the end of the corridor was not entirely blank. In the dream, faint lines traced the outline of a door, just under the paint. A darker rectangle where a frame would be. A subtle bulge where a knob might have once turned. I woke with my hand outstretched toward the real wall beside the bathroom, fingertips tingling. Over the next week, details shifted. I would put my keys on the hook by the door, only to find them later on the kitchen counter, in the exact spot I had kept them in our old Winnipeg apartment. A mug I always stored on the second shelf in the previous place kept appearing there in this kitchen, no matter where I moved it. Furniture seemed to settle into arrangements we had used before. Couch angled just so, lamp in the same corner, relative to the TV, without either of us remembering agreeing to it. "It is like the house already knows us," Eric joked one evening, stacking plates in the cupboard. "Weird upgrade from those shoeboxes we used to live in." I did not laugh. It felt less like the house knew us, and more like something had taken notes on our old layout and was applying them here. The sound started in the second week. Late at night, after we went to bed, I would hear faint knocking in the walls, not the random creaks of settling, not pipes, but a series of soft taps in sets of 3. Sometimes it came from the bedroom wall, sometimes from the living room, most often from that short back hall. One night, unable to sleep, I got up and stood in front of the blank wall at the end of that corridor. The air there felt slightly cooler, as if a draft leaked from nowhere. I pressed my ear against the paint and held my breath. From the other side, I heard footsteps. Not the heavy thump of boots, but a light measured tread, like someone walking barefoot across old boards. The steps passed by where my head rested, continued, then turned. It was the sound of someone moving through a hallway that did not exist anymore, pausing at a door that was no longer there. I backed away, heart pounding. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. The next morning, I checked the basement, half expecting to find some weird access hatch or hidden corridor. All I found was concrete, insulation, and the usual maze of pipes. No extra doors, no secret spaces. The first time I walked the missing hallway, I was not asleep. It happened about a month after we moved in. Eric was on a night shift and I was alone. The house felt unusually quiet. The hum of the fridge and the ticking clock in the living room too loud against the stillness. I had been half watching some forgettable show, but my eyes kept drifting to the short back hall whenever the camera cut to black. At some point past midnight, I became aware that I was standing. In that fuzzy, dislocated way that sometimes happens when you forget getting out of bed to go to the washroom, I found myself barefoot on the cool hardwood halfway down the corridor. The lights were off, but a dim glow from the kitchen nightlight gave everything a soft outline. The air felt thicker than usual, as if I had walked into a place with more weight per breath. Ahead of me, the wall looked different. The paint was the same color, but the surface seemed less flat. As my eyes adjusted, faint lines emerged, tracing a rectangle. A door, exactly where the old floor plan in my dreams said it should be. An old wooden door, just visible when I tilted my head right, the edges shimmering slightly like heat mirage. My hand lifted on its own. The sensation was wrong, like my arm belonged to someone else. My fingers curled around an invisible knob, and for an instant I felt cool metal under my skin. The urge to turn it was overwhelming, instinctive, like the need to scratch an itch. Somewhere behind me, the refrigerator motor kicked on with a low hum. The mundane noise snapped the moment. The door lines flickered and vanished, dissolving back into blank wall. My hand met only dry paint. I stumbled backward, heart racing. From that night on, I kept lights on in the hallway. It did not help much with the dreams. In them, the door was always real, the knob always solid, but I never remembered what lay beyond. I would step through and wake up with the taste of stale air in my mouth and dust in my nose. Things escalated in small ways. We started finding objects that did not belong to us. A child's wooden block under the couch with letters in a style neither of us recognized. A worn hair ribbon tucked behind the bathroom radiator. A single old-fashioned key on the kitchen windowsill one morning, brown with tarnish, teeth worn. When I set it on the counter and stepped away to grab my phone, it was gone when I turned back. Maybe the house came furnished in another life, Eric said, trying to make light. But even he stopped joking when the picture frames moved. We would wake to find different photos in different places, all hanging perfectly level. One of my parents that I knew I had put in the bedroom appeared on the staircase wall, exactly where a nail would have been in our old house. An empty frame turned up on the floor once, glass unbroken. The photo face down a few feet away, as if someone had taken it out to inspect and then lost interest. At some point, it stopped feeling like nostalgia and started feeling like imitation, as if somewhere, layered just out of sight, another version of this house existed where we had never left Winnipeg, where the door at the end of the hall had never been walled over, where someone else moved furniture, hung photos, and walked a hallway we could only sometimes almost touch. I tried to explain it to a coworker once, in watered-down terms. She just shrugged and said, old houses have history, that it was probably just my mind getting used to new surroundings. Maybe she was right. But there is one thing I cannot shake. A few months after we moved in, curiosity finally beat fear. One evening, while Eric was out, I stood in the back hall with my phone camera open and took a series of photos of the blank wall from different angles. Most of them showed nothing unusual, just eggshell paint and faint scuff marks. In one, though, the lighting hit just right, or wrong. Very faint, almost lost in the grain, there's the outline of a door. Faded panels, a knob, and in the dark patch where the hallway would continue beyond it, two small pale shapes like bare feet, turned as if about to step away. Every time I scroll past that image, my hand hesitates. Part of me wants to delete it, to erase the proof and pretend everything is just stress and overactive memory. Another part keeps it there, as if acknowledging it keeps whatever shares the house honest. We moved once more after that to a newer townhouse on the other side of town. Less character, more drywall. No strange doors. No familiar layouts. Still, sometimes, when I look at rental listings, I see floor plans that make my stomach drop. The same narrow entry, the same left-hand living room, the same short hallway to nowhere at the back, popping up in towns we have never lived in. Different landlords, different photos. Same bones. It feels less like we found a house that fit us and more like something followed us from one layout to another. Its idea of what home should look like overlaying places we have never seen. In our new place, there's a blank wall at the top of the stairs that sometimes looks in the corner of my eye like it wants to be a doorway. I avoid standing too close to it at night. I do not press my ear against it. I do not reach out my hand. Because now I am afraid that one evening, when the house is quiet and the air feels just slightly too thick, my fingers will close around a knob that is not there, turn it. And this time the hall on the other side will not let me wake up before I see how far it goes. Most people in town called it simply the grain road, as if that strip of gravel between the highway and the elevator did not deserve an actual name. It ran straight for 5 kilometers, narrowing as it went, flanked on one side by fields and on the other by a shallow ditch and a line of scrub trees. In daylight, it was nothing special. In fog, it became a tunnel, the kind of place headlights barely seemed to touch. My shifts at the elevator always ended late. I was 21, working evenings loading trucks and checking weights, the kind of job that left your clothes permanently dusted with fine flour and your nose full of the dry, sweet smell of grain. By the time I locked up and crossed the yard to my truck, the town would be mostly asleep. The only other light came from the elevator's sodium lamps and the faint glow of a farmhouse way off across the fields. Local drivers had one rule about the grain road that they always delivered with a half laugh, half warning. If you see kids on the side of the road in the fog, my supervisor said my first week, you do not stop, you do not slow down, you keep going, you leave them behind. I assumed he was talking about teenagers playing some drunk prank. When I asked him who these kids were supposed to be, his face shut down in a way that stuck with me. Just remember what I said, he replied. If you break for them, it does not go well. The fog rolled in hardest in late September, when the nights were cool and the land still held the day's warmth. It would creep up from the low spots, turning ditches into reservoirs of white and swallowing fence posts one by one. From the elevator office, you could watch it slowly engulf the road, the edges softening until the gravel might as well have been leading into nothing. The first time I saw them, it had been one of those nights. The last truck had gone. I had done my closing checks, locked the office, killed the overhead lights one by one until only the security lamp over the door remained. The fog was already thick enough that the far end of the yard was a vague gray mass. My truck's headlights cut narrow, bright tunnels that ended abruptly in swirling white. The grain road felt smaller than usual as I pulled onto it. The gravel hissed under my tires, the ditch on my right a milky blur. I kept my speed down, eyes scanning for deer or the occasional careless fox. The radio played low, Some late-night DJ's voice, distant and unimportant. About a kilometer from the elevator, they appeared. Two small figures standing at the edge of the ditch, hand in hand, turned toward the road. For a heartbeat, I thought they were just fence posts caught at a strange angle. Then one of the heads tilted slightly. In the high beams, I could see that they were wearing coats too light for the chill, something like simple jackets. Their bare legs pale above dark shoes. The taller one looked maybe 8 or 9, the smaller 5 or 6. Both had hair plastered to their heads by the damp. My foot moved toward the brake without conscious thought. Every instinct screamed to slow down. Kids. They should not have been out here, in this, alone. The thought of driving on and leaving them in that swirling white made my stomach twist. In the same instant, my supervisor's voice rang in my head as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. If you see kids on the side of the road in the fog, you do not stop. The taller one raised a hand, not quite a wave, more of a reaching motion. The smaller kept holding on, head bowed. My truck drew closer, the fog thickening, the beams glaring off droplets. I could see more details now, knees knobby under thin fabric, shoes muddy, the taller one's mouth a dark line. I did what every story tells you not to do. I eased my foot off the accelerator and pressed the brake. Just a little, I told myself, just to get a better look. Just to see if there was a vehicle in the ditch, some sign of where they had come from. The truck slowed, the engine dropping to a low, unhappy hum. The gravel's hiss quieted. The figures did not move aside. They did not back away. They just watched. The fog thickened abruptly, as if someone had turned a dial. My headlights hit a dense wall of white that reflected the light straight back at me, turning the world outside into glowing nothing. The truck shuddered, like I had started up a hill that I knew was not there. The radio cut out mid-song, leaving a dull hiss. The kids were suddenly closer. They stood now almost in the middle of the road, still hand in hand directly in my lane. I'd not seen them step. One moment they were at the edge. The next, they were there, 10 meters ahead, faces pale in the glare. I slammed the brakes harder. The anti-lock system chattered under my foot. The truck skidded slightly, then came to a stop. The figures did not flinch. For a few terrible seconds, all I saw were two small forms, backlit by my own lights. Their features lost in the wash, their shadows stretching behind them into the fog. Then they were gone. Not walked away, not skipped into the ditch. One blink, and the space where they had stood was empty. The fog swirled lazily. The road was just wet gravel and two narrow ruts for my tires. No footprints in the damp dust. No sign they had ever been there. I sat gripping the wheel, my breath loud in the cab, heart doing a rabbit-fast stutter against my ribs. Slowly, the radio crackled back to life, picking up in the middle of a different song than the one that had been playing seconds before. The truck's engine no longer strained. The air felt lighter, though the fog still clung thick outside. That was when I noticed the handprints. They were on the inside of the windshield just above the dash. Small, perfect prints, fingers splayed, palm smears pressed against the glass from my side. There were two sets, one slightly larger than the other, as if two children had leaned forward to brace themselves and then slid downward. The glass had been clear when I left the elevator. I was certain of it. Now, faint trails ran from the fingertips down toward the defrost vents, as if something damp had slowly dragged, leaving residual moisture that had already begun to evaporate. I lifted a shaking hand and touched one. The outline was cold, not the cool of glass on a fall night, but a deeper chill that sank into the pad of my finger. The moisture was real. My finger came away damp. I wiped the prints away with the sleeve of my jacket, my movements jerky. My hands would not quite do what I wanted. The act of erasing them felt both necessary and wrong, like wiping chalk drawings from a sidewalk where you knew the artist would never return. I drove home faster than I should have after that, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The fog thinned as I neared the highway, the lights of town gradually emerging. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my rational mind had begun its desperate work. Fog makes you see things. Moisture condenses on glass in weird patterns. Maybe some dirt or oil from an old handprint had just finally shown up. Maybe. Each explanation felt flimsy, but I grabbed at them anyway. The next day, when I told my supervisor, he did not laugh. "Did you stop?" he asked. I hesitated. I slowed down. I thought, "You stopped," he cut in, expression flat. "You braked for them." I nodded. He sighed heavily, rubbing his face with calloused hands. "You are lucky you are sitting here telling me about it," he said. "Some do not make it that far." "What are they?" I asked. "Who are they?" He looked toward the window, where the bright rectangle of day made the grain road look harmless. "Years back," he said slowly, "before your time, there was a family lived out past the elevator. Old farmhouse. The parents went to town one night, left the kids with an older cousin or something. Fog rolled in thick. Car coming back from the highway missed the turn, took the ditch, flipped. By the time anyone realized, it was too late. They say the kids were standing out by the road, waiting for headlights that never came." He shrugged, the motion stiff. "Stories grow," he added. "Details get added. People say they see them when the fog is bad, that if you stop, they try to get in, that if you let them, you do not get all the way home." "That is just a story," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," he replied, "but you saw something, and you braked." He did not forbid me from driving the grain road. He did not tell me I was crazy. He just repeated the rule. "If it happens again," he said, "you keep going. Even if they are in the middle of the road. You do not slow down. You do not let them catch up." In the weeks that followed, I avoided late shifts when fog was in the forecast. When I could not, I took the longer route along the highway and back roads, adding 20 minutes to my drive just to bypass that stretch. On clear nights, when I did use the grain road, I kept my eyes straight ahead, refusing to let my gaze linger on the edges of my vision where shadows might take shape. It did happen again. Months later, another thick fog, another late close. This time I saw only a suggestion of movement in the white ahead, a flicker like small forms shifting at the roadside. My hands tightened on the wheel, my foot hovered, then pressed harder on the accelerator instead of the brake. The truck plowed through the thickest patch, engine complaining. For a second, the air in the cab went frigid. Moisture bloomed on the inside of the windshield, frosting the edges, obscuring the outside world more completely than any fog. I did not dare take my hands off the wheel to wipe it. I drove blind for 3 heartbeats, trusting the straightness of the road. Then, as abruptly as before, the temperature snapped back. The frost melted, running in thin trails down the glass. When I could see again, the road was empty. No shapes, no kids. Just the endless ribbon of gravel and the distant comforting glow of the highway intersection ahead. I did not look for handprints that night. I went straight home, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark cab listening to my own breathing until my heartbeat slowed. Later, curiosity won. I flicked the dome light on and leaned close to the windshield. There were faint streaks like fingers dragged downward through condensation. Not as clear as before, not full prints. Just the hint of someone testing the barrier and finding it thinner than last time. I have thought a lot about that flattening of lore and experience since then. About how a warning turns into a joke, turns back into a warning when something leans its weight on the other side of the glass. Maybe the kids on the grain road are just the story people tell themselves to explain that sudden wrong feeling in the fog. Maybe they are what is left when people wait too long for someone who never comes. Either way, when the mist lies thick over the ditches and the elevator lights glow like an island, I do not drive that road anymore. And if, from a distance, I ever catch a glimpse of 2 small silhouettes by the gravel's edge, hand in hand, turned toward the unseen approach of headlights, I will not slow down. Some rules in small towns sound like superstition until the night you understand they were the only thing standing between you and something that has learned exactly how to look like a plea for help. By the time I turned 16, the water tower in Thompson was less of a landmark and more of a stage. If you wanted to sneak a smoke, drink cheap beer, or make out where your parents would not catch you, you went to the scrubby clearing beneath its long shadow. The tower rose up out of the trees at the edge of town like some rusted monument, its legs braced wide, the tank stained by decades of weather. During the day, it was just part of the skyline. At night, it felt like it was watching. My friends and I claimed a specific spot there, a half circle of logs dragged into a makeshift seating area where the trees thinned, and you could see the faint glow of town lights through the branches. The dirt was packed hard from years of boots and tires. Crushed cans and broken bottles glittered in the weeds. Someone had spray-painted initials on one of the tower supports so many times that the metal looked bruised. The stories about the Watcher started as a joke. One September evening, as we clustered around a Bluetooth speaker and passed a bottle between us, my friend Jenna pointed at the tree line. "Do not stare too long," she said, affecting a spooky voice. "That is when he notices you. The guy in the trees, the one who picks the ones who stay too late." Everyone laughed, rolling their eyes. We had all heard variations of it before. Creepy loner, old hermit, ex-logger gone strange, take your pick. In a town where darkness came early and stayed long, the idea of someone standing just beyond the circle of firelight, watching, was almost a comfort. It meant something was out there with you. "What? Some drunk guy with a rifle," I scoffed. "He can watch all he wants. We will just throw cans at him." Still, the idea lodged somewhere in the back of my mind. Even when I laughed along, I found myself glancing into the trees more often, trying to shake the sensation that one shadow among them lingered a little too long between blinks. Then people started going missing. It began with pets. Flyers went up in the grocery store and on the post office bulletin board. Dogs that had never strayed before. Cats that did not come back from their nightly prowls. Most were from streets clustered near the woods that bordered the water tower clearing. Folks blamed coyotes, cars, the usual. Winter swallowed some of the questions. The first person we knew who vanished was a girl from my school named Tessa. Quiet, smart, always walking home with her headphones on. She lived on a side street that backed onto the same patch of trees. One night in January, she did not come back from a study session at a friend's house. Her footprints in the fresh snow made it halfway down her street, then veered toward the narrow footpath that led into the woods. They found her backpack near the path entrance, ripped open, books scattered. There were boot prints in the snow that did not match hers. The trail led into the trees and just stopped. RCMP combed the area. Search and rescue volunteers stomped through drifts until their faces were raw with wind. They found nothing. No blood, no clothing, no sign of a struggle beyond the open pack. After a week, the headlines shrank. Rumors grew to fill the gap. She probably ran away, some people said. Got a ride out of town. Kids do that. Except Tessa had left her wallet, her ID, her extra asthma inhaler. No one who knew her believed she had just decided to vanish into thin air. 2 more people disappeared over the next 3 months, both from streets that curved along the edge of the same tree belt. One was an older man who liked to walk his small dog late at night. The dog came home alone one evening, dragging its leash, fur matted with burrs. The other was a woman who worked at the hospital. She never arrived for her shift. Her car was found in her driveway, keys inside, front door locked. The words "potential serial offender" started making their way into conversations, half-whispered, as if speaking them too loudly might summon something. Patrol cars started parking more often near the tower access road. The RCMP held a town hall and advised everyone to travel in pairs, avoid the woods at night, and report anything suspicious. We still went to the water tower. At first, it felt like defiance. If we gave up our spot, it felt like giving in to fear we did not fully understand. We told ourselves the danger was closer to those back streets, not out by our sacred hangout. The tower clearing was our place, and nothing bad had ever happened there. One Friday night, with snow still clinging in dirty heaps around the base of the supports, Jenna's older cousin brought a real camera instead of just a phone. He was into amateur ghost hunting, the sort of guy who watched grainy YouTube videos about EVP and orbs. He suggested we do an overnight investigation of the Watcher legend. You know he is just some drunk who lives in the bush. Right, I said, as he set up his tripod. Maybe, he replied, or maybe there's something else. Either way, audio does not lie. If there is someone creeping around out there, we might catch him talking to himself. It sounded ridiculous. It also sounded like a distraction from the gnawing anxiety that had settled over town. We agreed. He set one recorder on a log and kept another in his pocket, clipping an external microphone to his jacket. The plan was simple: sit, drink, talk as usual, then have a quiet session where we asked questions into the dark and waited for a response on playback. I rolled my eyes so hard it hurt, but part of me was curious. For most of the night, nothing happened. We joked, argued about music, watched our breath fog in the cold air. Occasionally, I caught myself staring into the tree line, trying to see if any shape looked more solid than the others. Nothing did. The tower legs loomed above us, a geometry of metal against the starless sky. Around 1 in the morning, when the cold started to seep into our bones, even through layers, Jenna's cousin announced it was session time. He turned down the music, made us sit in a rough circle, and asked us to be quiet. Then, facing the darkest part of the woods, he spoke. "If anyone is out there," he said, voice steady, "if anyone is watching, we want to talk. Who are you?" Nothing replied but the faint rush of wind over the tank and the distant hum of the highway. He asked a few more questions, standard paranormal investigation stuff. "Why are you here? Did you hurt those people? What do you want?" At one point, I almost laughed, the absurdity of it pushing against my throat. But then, every few seconds, I felt the hairs on my arms lift as if a static charge passed through the clearing. The sensation came and went like a slow, invisible wave. He wrapped it up after 10 minutes. We turned the music back on, eager to chase away the weird silence we had invited. When he suggested listening to the audio right there, on the spot, none of us said no. We huddled around his phone as he scrubbed through the recording. At first, it was just us, our voices, the crunch of boots, the occasional clink of glass. Then the session portion began. His voice sounded smaller on playback, thinner against the emptiness. "Who are you?" Past him asked the dark. For several seconds, there was only wind. Then faintly under the noise, another voice answered. It was so soft at first that we all leaned in, heads almost touching. A whisper, low and breathy. Not one person. Many, layered together. The individual words blurred, but the rhythm carried meaning. A pattern like instructions. No. Use. Only watch. Wait. When alone. Follow. The hair at the back of my neck stood up. "That is just pareidolia," Jenna's cousin said quickly, though his face had gone pale. "Your brain hears patterns and noise." He rewound, turned the volume up slightly, and played it again. The second time, it was clearer. "Only when alone. Watch them walk, count their steps, then take." We stared at each other, the clearing suddenly feeling too open, too exposed. The sound did not match any of our voices. It was too low, too layered, as if a crowd was whispering in unison just beyond the microphone's pickup range. Then came something worse. On the recording, after a long, hiss-filled pause, a different voice spoke. Deeper, singler, calm in a way that made my stomach knot. "Left on Cedar," it said. "She takes Cedar. Walks alone. No dog, no car. Headphones." The word headphones hit like a slap. Tessa had always worn hers. Everyone in town knew that detail. The official reports had never mentioned which street she cut down that night, but Cedar was one of the ones that backed onto the woods near the tower. On the audio, the deeper voice continued, almost clinical. "Wait until she passes the third light. Step out. Walk behind, not beside. Count 20, then reach." I felt like I was going to be sick. "Turn it off," I said. "No, wait," Jenna began. "Turn it off," I repeated louder. He did. We sat there, breathing in the cold air. Every snap of a twig suddenly magnified. None of us wanted to be the one to say what we were all thinking, that whatever we had captured did not sound like a ghost. It sounded like someone teaching someone else how to follow and grab a person without being noticed. We left soon after, the comfortable ritual of lingering under the tower broken. As we walked back along the access road, I could not shake the sense of eyes tracking us from the dark, listening to our footfalls, counting. The next day, Jenna's cousin went to the RCMP detachment with the audio file. They listened. They took a copy. They asked him questions about where it had been recorded, who had been there, whether anyone could have been hiding in the trees. Later, we heard that they compared the voices to known offenders, to men brought in for questioning about the disappearances. If they found a match, they never said. A week later, the truck appeared. It was an old pickup, mid-90s model, dull blue paint parked under the water tower when we walked by one evening on our way to a friend's place. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside. Mud splattered the tires. No one sat behind the wheel. "Maybe someone else claimed our spot," Reese joked, forcing a laugh. "Town is getting too crowded." The next night, it was there again. Same angle, same spot, no driver in sight. Over the next month, the pattern continued. The truck would be parked under the tower in the evenings, no one around it. No fresh tracks leading to or from it in the dirt. Sometimes it faced the road. Sometimes it faced the woods. Once, the bed was lined with plastic sheeting that fluttered slightly in the breeze. We reported it. The RCMP checked it out. Rumor said the plates were expired, registered to an address that no longer existed. One morning, we heard it had been found burned out on a logging road north of town. Nothing left but a twisted frame and blackened metal. People stopped going to the tower after that. The clearing felt tainted, too close to whatever had been happening in those trees for too long. The Watcher story shifted in our heads. It stopped being about some faceless figure in the woods and became about the very human danger of someone learning patterns, perfecting routes, watching from the same shadowed spot until they knew exactly when to step out. I left Thompson a couple of years later for school. In the city, the water towers are just infrastructure, not stages. Still, sometimes when I see one, part of my mind calculates angles, where someone could park unseen, where the tree line begins, how far the nearest house is. The last time I visited home, my younger brother showed me something on his phone. An anonymous account had sent him a photo via a throwaway app. It was a shot of a narrow street in some small town. Not ours. Not anywhere I immediately recognized. Trees lined one side, houses huddled on the other. The caption under it was just coordinates and a time. "They have been sending these to people," he said. "Different streets, different towns, always at the edges." I could not help thinking of the layered whisper on that recording, the deeper voice that gave directions like it was teaching a class. Left on cedar, third light, count 20. Then reach. The RCMP never officially linked the disappearances near the tower. No charges, no neat explanations. New people moved into the houses along the woods. Dogs barked at dusk. Teens found other places to drink and smoke and pretend nothing bad could happen to them. But every small town has its version of a watcher. A figure at the edge of light, in the tree line, by the water tower, on the walking trail. Some of them are stories. Some of them are men who learn routines and use the cover of familiarity like camouflage. And somewhere, on a hard drive or a police evidence server, there's still a recording of a night under a rusted tank where a group of kids thought they were chasing a ghost story and instead caught the echo of something worse. Whenever I walk alone at night now, I listen for the sound of footsteps behind me. Not fast, not rushing, just steady, measured counting. The thing about working nights at the hospital in Brandon is that after a while, you start to feel like you know the building better in the dark than anyone ever will in the day. By the time what happened on level 3 began, I had been a cleaner there for 4 years. I knew which automatic doors stuck in winter, which vents rattled during storms, which lights flickered in specific corridors, every time someone flushed a toilet 2 floors down. The place had its quirks, but they were familiar. They made sense. The overflow wing did not. It started on a Tuesday at the end of February, the kind of brittle cold night where even the hospital's heating struggled to keep up. I clocked in at 10 p.m., grabbed my cart, and did what I always did, check the assignment sheet clipped to the wall in the housekeeping office. There was a new page on top. Temporary overflow wing, level 3, it said, in the same generic font our admin used for everything. Beneath it was a simple map, a long corridor running off the main level 3 hallway, a series of rooms on either side, a small nurse's station at the far end. Every room had a number. Notes in the margin listed tasks: restock paper supplies, wipe surfaces, mop floors, check curtains. I frowned. I had worked every floor in that building at one time or another. I knew level 3 as the rehab and step-down unit, a loop of wards and offices wrapped around the central core. There was no long, straight corridor branching off it like the one on that page. New construction? I asked Jenna, the other night cleaner on shift, holding up the map. She squinted at it, then shook her head. You sure that is not for across town? The psych center has that layout. It says this hospital's name, I said. Right here. Level 3. She shrugged. Maybe they carved out some space while you were off. You know how they are about overflow whenever flu season hits. The sheet had yesterday's date on it. I'd been on level 1 the previous night. If they had opened some temporary wing, it would have been fast work. I tucked the map into my pocket and rolled my cart into the elevator. Level 3, on the panel, was the same button it had always been. The doors opened onto the usual central hub, a circle of beige walls, the nurse's station lit with tired fluorescent glare, the scent of coffee and disinfectant thick in the air. A tired-looking nurse nodded at me as I passed. The whiteboard behind her listed the usual bed count. There was no mention of an overflow. I followed the map. According to it, the entrance to the wing should have been at the far end of the east corridor, past the rehab gym and a storage room. I had mopped that hallway 1,000 times. It ended in a wall with an old fire hose cabinet and a faded no exit sign. Tonight, it ended in a wall with an old fire hose cabinet and a faded no exit sign. No door. No branching corridor. Just the same scuffed baseboard and a patch of paint where someone had repaired a crack years ago. I stood there for a minute, listening. The hum of air vents, the distant beep of monitors, a soft snore from one of the nearby rooms. Nothing from beyond the wall except the hollow quiet you get inside big buildings at night. The map in my pocket felt heavier than a single sheet of paper. I pulled it out and held it up, lining the printed lines with the hallway I stood in. According to the page, I should be looking down a 40-meter corridor. According to my eyes, I was looking at a blank beige barrier. I almost tossed the thing in the trash right there, chalking it up to some clerical error. Instead, I folded it and slid it back into my pocket. Habit, maybe. Or curiosity. The rest of the shift, I stuck to my usual routine. Patient rooms, staff washrooms, the rehab gym with its idle machines and stacked foam blocks. Still, every time I passed the east corridor, I felt pulled toward the far end, like a faint draft of colder air was brushing against my neck from a place that did not exist. Nothing changed. The wall stayed a wall. 2 nights later, it did not. That Friday, the hospital was quieter than usual. Flu season had eased, and the worst of the winter accidents had not started yet. My assignment sheet again listed the temporary overflow wing, level 3, with the same map and tasks. No one else seemed to pay it any attention. By 1 in the morning, I had finished my usual circuit. The east corridor hummed under fluorescent lights, empty of staff and patients. I pushed my cart toward the no exit sign, telling myself I was only going to look, to prove to myself nothing had changed. Halfway down the hall, the lighting shifted. It was subtle, a slight dimming, a warmer tone. The overhead fixtures ahead flickered, then steadied at a lower brightness. The air felt cooler, the smell in my nose changing from the familiar lemon cleaner and institutional plastic to something older. Dust, stale fabric, a hint of alcohol, the old kind they used to keep in glass bottles. Where the blank wall should have been, there was a doorway. It was not dramatic, no sound, no cinematic slow reveal. One blink, and the flat beige surface had become a double door recessed into the wall, painted the same color, but edged with metal trim. A small sign above it glowed softly. 3E Overflow. I stopped so abruptly the cart bumped into my heels. Every rational part of my brain screamed that I must have been mistaken before, that the door had always been there, hidden in plain sight, and I simply never noticed, that some overnight maintenance crew had worked miracles in the last 48 hours. But there was no fresh paint, no plaster dust, no smell of new construction. The metal push plates on the doors were scuffed from years of use. The linoleum just inside showed the same worn pattern as every other older wing in the building. I reached out and pushed. The door swung inward on well-oiled hinges, revealing a dim corridor lit by a row of recessed fixtures. It stretched straight ahead, lined with open doorways to patient rooms just like the map showed. At the far end, a small nurse's station glowed under a desk lamp, its computer screens dark. The air inside was colder than the rest of Level 3, cool enough that I saw a faint wisp of breath when I exhaled. My cart's wheels squeaked on the floor, the sound too loud in the stillness. "Hello?" I called, voice bouncing off the walls. "Housekeeping." No answer. I stepped inside. The rooms on either side were occupied, not full, not overflowing. But in bed after bed, figures lay under thin blankets. Ghostly in the low light. Some wore old-style hospital gowns, the kind I had only seen in photos. Thicker cotton, different patterns. The equipment beside them was wrong, too. Monitors with analog dials. IV stands with glass bottles instead of plastic bags. A few beds had no machines at all, just metal railings and mechanical cranks at the foot. In one room, a woman with gray hair and hollow cheeks stared at the ceiling, lips moving soundlessly. In another, a man in his 30s lay with his eyes closed, chest rising shallowly, an oxygen tent over his head that looked like something from a 70s documentary. The name cards at the foot of each bed were handwritten in careful script, some with dates that did not make sense. No one reacted to me. No one turned their head when I rolled past. It was like they were trapped in an unending moment, all of them suspended in whatever night this wing belonged to. At the nurse's station, an old computer sat on the desk, its monitor thick and boxy, powered off. Beside it, a stack of paper charts leaned precariously. A wall clock ticked quietly above, its hands moving in slow, steady arcs. According to it, the time was 11:19. My watch said 1:37. A small calendar page pinned next to the clock caught my eye. March, year 1994. I swallowed, throat dry. The map in my pocket suddenly felt very warm against my leg. I pulled it out and compared it to the space around me. Every room number matched. The scribbled note in the margin, extra bed in 3E7, lined up with the double-occupied room halfway down the right. A soft sound behind me made me turn. At the nearest bed, a patient had shifted. A man in his 60s, gaunt, eyes sunk deep. He looked at me, and for a moment his gaze was not the glazed inward stare of someone heavily medicated. It was sharp, present. "You are not supposed to be here," he said, his voice rough but steady. My mouth went dry. "I work here. Housekeeping. They put this on my sheet." I held up the map like a talisman. He blinked slowly. "Sheet," he echoed, as if tasting the word. "They tried to close us. Move us, did they?" "Yes," I said before I could stop myself. "This wing, it does not exist. Not anymore. He smiled faintly, a tired, sad twist of his lips. It never existed, he said. That is why they put us here. He closed his eyes again, the conversation apparently over. A distant alarm beeped once, then cut off. Down the corridor, a door stood slightly ajar. I heard the soft murmur of someone humming a lullaby, the tune old and slow. It felt like the whole wing was breathing in time with that song. Panic finally broke through, whatever trance had brought me this far. I backed away from the nurse's station, nearly tripping over my cart. The air felt thicker now, harder to pull into my lungs. The lights hummed in a lower register, too deep to be normal electricity. As I turned toward the entrance, the floor seemed longer than before, the far end farther away by a few steps. My pulse hammered. The double doors stayed visible, small rectangles of slightly brighter light, but reaching them felt like walking uphill. I did not run. Some deep instinct told me not to. Instead, I forced myself to walk steadily, one foot in front of the other, gripping the cart handle so hard my knuckles hurt. I passed the line of rooms again. In one, a nurse in an outdated uniform, white dress, cap, stockings, stood beside a bed, head bowed as if checking a drip. Her hair was pinned in a style I had only seen in old photos. As I passed, she lifted her head and looked straight at me. Her eyes did not register surprise or curiosity. They looked through me, assessing, then moved on as if I were one more item on a checklist she needed to finish before whatever shift she was trapped in ended. I reached the doors and shoved. They swung outward into the east corridor of the modern level 3, bright with fluorescent light, the no exit sign hanging crooked above. Behind me, when I glanced back, there was only a flat beige wall, no doorway, no sign, no hum of older lights. I stood there, breathing hard, the wheels of my cart still trembling slightly from the push. My watch read 1:41. When I checked the clock back at the main nurse's station, it showed 1:42. Barely 5 minutes had passed since I had headed down the corridor. I did not tell anyone that night. How could I? Hey, I just walked into a wing from 1994 that does not physically exist, is not the kind of thing you drop on an exhausted nurse at 2 in the morning. Instead, after my shift, I went home, showered for longer than necessary, and lay awake staring at the ceiling until the sky outside my window turned pale. The next night, the assignment sheet did not mention any overflow wing. The map was gone from the wall. When I asked the supervisor about extra level 3 areas, she frowned. Overflow, she repeated. We have not had anything like that in years. We use level 5 now if we need extra beds. What about the East Hall? I pressed. Any renovations? Old wards? She shook her head. That hallway has been a dead end since I started. Why? No reason, I said. I kept the map. In the weeks that followed, I tried once to go back. On a quiet Wednesday, at the same time of night, I walked the east corridor again, pushing my cart, half hoping and half dreading that the wall would give way to doors. It did not. The lights stayed their harsh, modern white. The paint remained unbroken. The no exit sign swung slightly in a draft that smelled like fresh floor cleaner and nothing else. I told myself I had imagined it. That sleep deprivation and routine and the weirdness of working nights had finally warped my perception. That the calendar on that nurse's station wall, the analog clock, the feel of cooler air, the patients in their old gowns, the nurse in her starched uniform, that all of it was some elaborate waking dream. Then, one day in the staff lounge, I noticed a framed photo on the wall. It showed a group of nurses and doctors standing in a corridor, smiling at the camera. The picture was dated March 1994. The plaque beneath thanked them for their work in the temporary overflow ward during the winter surge. The hallway in the photo was long and straight. Rooms opened off both sides. A small nurse's station stood at the far end. The pattern on the linoleum, the scuffs, the way the light fell on the walls, it all matched the place I had walked. I studied the faces. One of the nurses near the center wore a crisp white dress and cap, her hair pinned up neatly. Her eyes, even in the fuzzy print, looked the same as the woman who had glanced through me without really seeing. I asked an older nurse about it. "Oh, that place," she said, following my gaze. "We shut that down not long after that photo. Plumbing issues, mold. Administration decided it was cheaper to wall it off than fix it. Some of the staff said it never felt right. Patients got confused there, heard things, saw things. They moved everyone out in a hurry." "Walled it off," I repeated. "Like, covered the doors." "Yeah," she said. "Drywall, paint, the whole bit. You have probably walked past where it used to be 100 times." She sipped her coffee, oblivious to the way my stomach dropped. I transferred to another hospital a few months later. Officially, it was for better hours and a tiny bump in pay. Unofficially, I could not shake the feeling that every time I wheeled a cart down a quiet corridor, some other hallway waited just out of sync, full of patients from winters past, beds still occupied in a wing that no longer exists on blueprints. Sometimes in my new building, the air feels a degree colder in a particular stretch of floor. Sometimes, out of habit, I check the walls for seams that should not be there, for subtle changes in light that might mean a door is waiting to become visible. And sometimes, when the clocks on my phone and the ones on the wall disagree by a few stray minutes, I think about the analog hand ticking over 11:19 in a place that was already years out of date, and I wonder how many other overflow wings are still out there, tucked into the folds of hospitals that insist they have no room left. If I ever see a new map appear on an assignment board showing a corridor where only a wall should be, I know one thing. I will not push the doors open again to see who is still waiting on the other side.